What if I told you that a comet discovered in 2019 is following the exact same path described by Sumerian priests 5,000 years ago? Not similar, exact. The same arc through space, the same timing, the same trajectory that ancient star watchers carved into clay tablets when the pyramids had not yet been built. Scientists call it Three-Eye Atlas, an interstellar object moving at 87 kilometers per second through the outer edges of our solar system. But the ancients had a different name for it. They called it the Red Wanderer, and they believed it marked the return of the Anunnaki, beings from a distant world who shaped the first human cities, taught the earliest priests to read the stars, and then vanished into the sky, leaving only one promise carved in stone. When the Wanderer returns, they return. And tonight, as you stand beneath this quiet sky, that Wanderer is moving closer. You have been told that ancient civilizations knew nothing about deep space, that their stories of gods and wandering stars were primitive myths born from fear and imagination. But what if they were recording something real? What if the Sumerian priests were not writing myths, but tracking an object that returns to our solar system every few thousand years? An object we are watching right now. An object that behaves in ways our models cannot explain. It brightens when it should fade. It shifts direction when no force should move it. And it leaves traces of metallic particles that do not belong in natural comets. The ancients said this light was a sign, a messenger sent ahead of something far greater. And they warned that when the Red Wanderer appeared, the world would stand between two fires, caught in a moment that would test everything humanity had become. If they were right about the path, if they were right about the timing, then what else were they right about? You are standing at the edge of that moment now, whether you feel it or not, and the sky is already beginning to speak in ways we are only starting to understand. Strange sounds drift through the atmosphere in places where no machines exist, long metallic tones that echo across deserts and frozen valleys. Electromagnetic disturbances flicker through devices for reasons scientists cannot trace. Animals shift their patterns, moving in rhythms that mirror the arc of Three-Eye Atlas as it crosses the night. These are not disasters. They are whispers, quiet signals that something ancient is stirring, something that has been waiting in the darkness for the moment when humanity would be ready to see it again. The Sumerians believed this moment would come when humans reached a point where their creations mirrored the works of the old gods, when we could shape life, build machines that think, and reach toward the stars with tools that seemed impossible only generations ago. They wrote that when this happened, the Wanderer would return, and the Anunnaki would look down from their distant world to see what we had become. This is not a story about fear or the end of the world. This is a story about a crossing, a moment written into the fabric of time itself, a moment when the balance between past and future, between creators and creation, stands perfectly still and waits for the world to choose its next step. If you stay with me until the end, you will see what history has never dared to tell. You will understand why the sky is speaking again, why the ancients carved their warnings with such care, and what it means for the world standing beneath these shifting heavens. You will learn about the hidden kingdom the Anunnaki left behind, the long, silent route of Nibiru moving through the outer dark, the prophecy written by the old teacher Enki himself, and the conflict that shaped the fate of humanity before recorded history began. You will see the signs appearing in our modern sky, signs that match the ancient descriptions with unsettling precision, and you will hear the question the Sumerians whispered across 5,000 years of silence. What happens when the two fire stars meet? And when the world stands between them, who decides what comes next? If you are listening right now, wherever you are in the world, whether you are lying in bed with the lights turned low, walking beneath the stars, or sitting in a quiet room as the night deepens around you, take a moment to subscribe to this channel to support us, and never miss the next stories waiting for you. because this journey is just beginning, and the path ahead leads deeper into the mystery than you might imagine. The ancient watchers believed that understanding comes not through noise, but through stillness, not through rushing, but through patience. And as we follow the red wanderer across the sky, we will move the same way, slowly, carefully, listening to what the silence has to say. So, breathe deeply, let your thoughts settle like dust after a long wind, and step with me into the first chapter of this story, into the time before cities, before kings, before written language spread across the world, into the quiet nights when Sumerian priests stood on stone platforms and watched a red light moving through the heavens, a light that did not behave like other stars, a light they believed carried the voice of the gods, and a light that has returned to our sky with the same strange intention, following the path it carved through space long before any of us were born. Chapter 1. The Red Wanderer. You are standing now in the time before cities rose from dust, before written stories spread across the world like seeds carried on wind, before kings wore crowns or priests built temples that touched the sky. The air is dry and still, carrying the scent of river clay and distant fires, and above you the heavens stretch in perfect darkness, unmarred by the glow of streetlights or the haze of modern pollution. Every star is visible, sharp and clear, like holes punched through black fabric to reveal the light beyond. And you can see the whole river of stars we call the Milky Way flowing overhead in a band of silver dust. You are in Mesopotamia, in the land between two rivers, and you have climbed to the highest platform of the ziggurat, a stepped pyramid of mud brick that rises above the flat plain like a mountain built by human hands. The stone beneath your feet is still warm from the sun that set hours ago, and the wind moves gently across your skin, bringing whispers from the desert that stretches endlessly to the west. This is where the watchers come each night, the priests who have dedicated their lives to understanding the language of the heavens, and tonight you are standing among them, holding a stylus made of reed, ready to press marks into the wet clay tablet that rests in your hands. The tablet is heavy, cool, damp against your palms, and you can feel the weight of responsibility it carries. What you record tonight will be preserved for thousands of years, baked hard by fire, buried in the earth, waiting for a future generation to uncover and read. You look up at the sky, and you begin to understand why these priests feel such reverence, such quiet awe. The stars are not random points of light to them. They are a map, a clock, a message board where the gods write their intentions in movements too slow for a single lifetime to perceive, but clear enough when observed across generations. They have taught you to recognize the wanderers, the lights that move against the fixed backdrop of stars, the ones we now call planets, but they call the sheep of the night sky. Venus burns bright and low on the horizon, Jupiter glows steady and golden near the center of the sky, and Mars flickers with its characteristic red hue. But there is another light, one that troubles the priests, one that does not move the way the others move. It drifts slowly, heavily, following a path that seems to loop through regions of the sky no other wanderer touches. And when it appears, the elders grow quiet, their voices dropping to whispers, because they know what this light means. They call it the Red Wanderer, and they believe it is not simply a piece of the sky, but a sign, a messenger sent from a place they describe as the dark behind the wind, a realm beyond the edges of the world where the great teachers dwell, the ones they call the Anunnaki. You kneel down on the stone platform, the tablet resting on your knee, and you begin to press the wedge-shaped marks into the clay, recording the position of the Red Wanderer as it moves through the constellation they call the Bull of Heaven. Your hand moves with practiced precision, each mark carefully placed, because you know that accuracy matters, that these records will be compared with observations made decades ago by priests now long dead, and that future watchers will compare your work with observations they have not yet made. This is how knowledge builds across time, slowly, patiently, through the accumulation of careful attention. And as you work, you feel a strange connection to those who came before you and those who will come after, all of you staring at the same sky, tracking the same mysterious light. The Red Wanderer does not behave like other lights. It does not follow the simple paths that Venus and Jupiter trace, appearing and disappearing with predictable rhythm. Instead, it moves in a way that feels heavier, slower, as if weighted with purpose. And sometimes it seems to pause, hovering in one region of the sky for weeks before continuing its journey. The elder priests have told you stories passed down through generations, stories that say this wanderer returns on a cycle so long that no single person lives to see it twice, a cycle that spans what they call a Char, a unit of time so vast it encompasses the rise and fall of entire kingdoms. They believe this wanderer is connected to the Anunnaki, that its appearance marks moments when the great teachers draw close to the world, moments when the boundary between the realm of gods and the realm of humans grows thin, and they have recorded what happens when the Red Wanderer appears. Great floods sweep across the land, washing away cities and reshaping the courses of rivers. Droughts stretch for years, turning fertile soil to dust. Kings rise with sudden power and fall just as suddenly, as if the Wanderer's presence stirs the very foundations of order itself. These events are not seen as punishments, but as adjustments, as the natural result of a cycle far greater than human understanding, a cycle that ensures the world does not remain static, but continues to turn, to change, to evolve according to patterns written into the fabric of existence itself. But here's what makes your skin prickle as you kneel on that ancient platform. Here is what makes the elder priest standing beside you speak in a tone of reverence mixed with something that might be fear. The Red Wanderer is not simply drifting, it is following a pattern, a precise mathematical path that repeats across the centuries. And when the priests compare their tablets with records carved generations ago, they see the same arc, the same timing, the same slow approach toward a point in the sky they mark with special significance. They have calculated where the Wanderer will be in future years, and their predictions have proven accurate again and again. Which means this is not random, this is not chaos, this is something that follows rules, something that knows its path, something that moves with intention. You finish marking the tablet and set it carefully aside, and the elder priest places his hand on your shoulder, his grip firm but gentle, and he tells you something that will echo through the millennia, something that will be carved into clay and preserved through the collapse of empires and the rise of new civilizations. He says that the Red Wanderer is not alone, that it is the first sign, the herald that announces the approach of something far greater, something the ancient texts call Nibiru, a world that follows a path so wide and so long that it passes through regions of space where the rules of the sky begin to change, where time bends and light moves differently. And when Nibiru draws near, when its influence begins to touch the edges of our world, the Anunnaki return. They return not with thunder or fire, but with presence, with a weight that presses against the fabric of reality itself. And they return to see what humanity has become, to judge whether we have grown wisely or recklessly, whether we have honored the knowledge they gave us or misused it. And the Red Wanderer is the signal that announces their approach, the first light that says the time of testing is beginning. Modern astronomers who study ancient Sumerian tablets are often struck by the precision of these observations, by the careful mathematical calculations that show these priests understood orbital mechanics long before Newton formalized the laws of motion, long before telescopes allowed us to see the distant planets with clarity. When researchers compare the paths described in these ancient records with the movements of objects we observe today, they find correlations that are difficult to dismiss as coincidence. The arc of the Red Wanderer, as described in Sumerian texts, matches, with unsettling accuracy, the trajectory of certain long-period comets and trans-Neptunian objects, bodies that follow extremely elliptical orbits, disappearing into the outer darkness for thousands of years before returning to the inner solar system. Some scientists suggest these ancient watchers were observing a real phenomenon, tracking an object that genuinely returns on a vast cycle. And while mainstream astronomy remains cautious about attributing too much knowledge to ancient civilizations, the data sits there in the clay tablets, precise, mathematical, repeatable. The priests recorded not just the position of the Red Wanderer, but also its behavior, noting that it would sometimes grow brighter than expected, as if reacting to something unseen, or dim when it should have been most visible, as if passing behind or through something invisible to human eyes. They wrote that the Wanderer did not reflect light the way other celestial bodies did, that its glow had a quality they described as inner fire, as if it generated its own illumination rather than merely reflecting the sun's rays. And this description troubles modern researchers who study the light signatures of distant objects, because some interstellar visitors do indeed show unexpected brightening patterns, energy releases that do not match the behavior of simple ice and rock. The Sumerians believed this meant the Wanderer was not a dead object, but something alive in a way they could not fully articulate, something that carried within it the essence of the Anunnaki themselves, and they treated its appearance not as a scientific curiosity, but as a sacred event that required ritual, preparation, and deep respect. The priests developed a symbol for the Red Wanderer, a circle with a long tail that stretched across the top, and this symbol appears again and again in temple carvings, on cylinder seals, and in the margins of administrative texts where scribes recorded the business of the city. The symbol is always accompanied by small figures, human-shaped but taller, their arms raised toward the sky in gestures that could be worship, or warning, or simply acknowledgement. Some tablets show these tall figures standing beneath the symbol of the Wanderer, as if receiving its light, as if the glow of that distant object was a form of communication, a way for the Anunnaki to send messages across the impossible distances of space. The priests believed that when the Wanderer appeared, the air itself changed, becoming heavier, more charged, as if filled with invisible energy. And they claimed that during these periods, strange things happened. Animals behaved oddly, gathering in unusual numbers or fleeing regions they normally inhabited. The weather shifted in unexpected ways, with storms appearing out of season or calm stretches extending far longer than normal. People reported dreams that felt more vivid than waking life, visions that seemed to come from outside their own minds, and the priests interpreted these events as the influence of the Wanderer, spreading through the world like ripples in water, subtle but undeniable. They held ceremonies on nights when the Red Wanderer was visible, lighting fires on the highest platforms, burning incense made from cedar and myrrh, chanting prayers in the old language that even then was beginning to fade from common use. And they believed these rituals helped maintain the connection between the world of humans and the realm of the Anunnaki, ensuring that when the great teachers returned, they would find a people still capable of understanding, still worthy of guidance. You stand now in our modern time, but you carry with you the memory of that ancient night, the feeling of cool clay in your hands, the weight of the stylus, the vast darkness of the sky unmarred by electric light. And you understand something the Sumerians understood. The sky is not empty, it is not silent, it is speaking constantly, but in a language that requires patience to hear, attention to understand, and humility to accept. The Red Wanderer they tracked with such care is not just a myth, not just a poetic metaphor for seasonal change or political upheaval. It is something real, something that moves through space on a path we are only now beginning to trace again. And when scientists gave the name Atlas to the strange interstellar object that appeared in our sky in 2019, they were, perhaps without knowing it, invoking the same ancient archetype, the same symbol of a being who holds up the heavens, who carries the weight of cosmic order on their shoulders. The Sumerians would have recognized this immediately. They would have seen 3-eye Atlas not as a random chunk of ice, but as the return of the Red Wanderer, the first signal that the cycle is beginning again, that the Anunnaki are preparing to return, and that humanity stands once more at a threshold, a moment when the old teachers will look down and see what we have become. But the Red Wanderer was never meant to arrive alone. It was always understood to be the herald, the messenger sent ahead to announce the approach of something far greater. And that brings us to the question the ancient priests asked every time the Red Wanderer appeared in their sky, a question that echoes now through 5,000 years of silence, a question we are beginning to ask again as we watch 3-eye Atlas move through the darkness with strange intention. If this is the herald, then what follows? What world moves behind it, vast and slow, approaching from the dark behind the wind? Maybe the priests understood something we have forgotten in our rush to separate science from spirituality. Maybe they knew that observation and reverence are not opposites, but partners. That to truly see the sky, you must approach it with both precision and awe, with both measurement and meaning. The Red Wanderer was not just data to them. It was a presence, a force, a living connection to powers that shaped the world before humans learned to shape it themselves. And they honored that connection not with blind worship, but with careful attention, with the kind of deep focus that comes only when you believe what you are watching truly matters. Their tablets record not just positions and dates, but also the emotional weight of these observations, the sense that something profound was unfolding, something that would echo forward through time until it reached us, standing here in our modern world with our telescopes and our spectroscopes and our computer models, staring at an object that behaves in ways we cannot quite explain, wondering if perhaps the ancient watchers saw something we are only now beginning to glimpse. The cycle is not over. It is simply continuing, and the Red Wanderer has returned to announce what the Sumerians always said it would announce, that the time of change has come again, that the boundary between worlds is thinning, and that we must decide, as they decided, whether we will meet this moment with wisdom or with fear, with openness or with denial, with the humility to admit that the universe may hold mysteries deeper than our current understanding can reach. Are you ready to follow this path deeper? Because the Red Wanderer has shown us its light. It has traced its arc across our modern sky, just as it traced its arc across ancient Mesopotamia. And now we must turn our attention to the world it heralded, to the kingdom the Anunnaki are said to have ruled before history began, to the places they built and the knowledge they left behind, waiting in silence for the moment when humanity would be ready to see it again. The priests believed this kingdom was not destroyed, but hidden, not lost, but sleeping, and they left clues, scattered across temples and tablets, pointing toward a place where the old teachers once walked openly among humans, teaching, building, shaping the first great civilization. Where is that kingdom now? And what secrets wait there, preserved through ages of forgetting, ready to reveal themselves when the cycle turns again? The path continues, and the silence has more to say. So stay with me as we step into the next chapter, as we leave the observation platform of ancient Sumer and walk backward through time, into the era before the Red Wanderer first appeared, into the time when the Anunnaki walked the earth and built wonders that still confound us, into the lost kingdom of the old teachers. Chapter 2. The Kingdom of the Old Teachers. You are walking now through a time even older than the Sumerian star watchers, a time before the clay tablets, before the ziggurats rose from the plains, before humanity understood itself as separate from the forces that shaped the world. The air here feels different, charged with something you cannot name, something that makes the hair on your arms stand up and your breath catch in your throat. You are approaching a city that should not exist, a place built with knowledge that historians say humans did not possess. And yet here it stands, massive stone blocks fitted together with such precision that you could not slide a blade between them. Walls that rise toward the sky in perfect geometric patterns, and streets laid out in grids that align with stellar coordinates no one should have been able to calculate. This is Uruk, or perhaps it is Eridu, or maybe it is one of the first cities whose names have been lost to time, swallowed by sand and silence. But the feeling is the same regardless of which city you stand in. This place was built by hands that knew more than they should have known, guided by minds that understood principles of engineering, astronomy, mathematics, and architecture that would not be rediscovered for thousands of years. You place your hand on one of the stone blocks, and the surface is cool and smooth, almost glassy, as if the stone has been fused rather than carved. And you wonder what tools created this finish, what hands shaped this perfection, and whether those hands were entirely human. The Sumerians themselves did not claim to have invented the knowledge that allowed them to build these cities. They said openly, repeatedly, in texts carved with care and preserved through millennia, that the knowledge was given to them by the Anunnaki, beings they described as tall, radiant, and filled with understanding that seemed to flow from them like light from the sun. These beings, according to the stories that have survived, did not arrive with violence or conquest. They came as teachers, showing early humans how to dig canals that would bring water to dry land, how to measure the stars and predict the seasons, how to write symbols that could preserve thought beyond the lifespan of memory, how to forge metal from rock, how to build structures that would stand for ages, and how to organize society in ways that allowed thousands of people to live together in harmony. The Anunnaki taught and humans learned, and the first great cities rose from the dust as a result of this exchange, this partnership between earthbound humanity and these beings who came from a place the Sumerians described simply as the sky. You walk through the streets of this impossible city, and everywhere you look, you see evidence of knowledge that should not exist here. You see astronomical alignments built into the architecture. You see mathematical ratios that govern the proportions of buildings and the spacing of streets. You see symbols carved into stone that match patterns found in much later civilizations separated by oceans and thousands of years, as if the same teachers moved across the world, leaving the same lessons wherever they went. Modern archaeologists who excavate these ancient sites are often struck by anomalies that their training does not prepare them to explain. They find stone blocks weighing hundreds of tons moved across impossible distances and lifted to heights that should have required machinery far beyond what Bronze Age humans possessed. They find evidence of advanced metallurgy, alloys that require precise temperature control, and knowledge of chemistry that supposedly did not exist until much later. They find drill holes cut into granite with such precision and uniformity that even modern diamond-tipped drills struggle to replicate the work. And they find star maps carved into temple walls that accurately depict celestial bodies not visible to the naked eye, bodies that should have remained unknown until the invention of the telescope. The standard explanation is that ancient peoples were simply more capable than we give them credit for, that given enough time and enough human labor, almost anything can be accomplished. And while this is true to a degree, it does not fully account for the evidence. The knowledge appears too suddenly, too completely formed, as if it arrived whole rather than developing gradually through trial and error. And the Sumerians themselves insisted that this is exactly what happened. They said the Anunnaki came down from the sky and taught them everything at once, not piece by piece, but as a complete system of understanding. And they built their entire civilization on the foundation of that gift, always acknowledging, always remembering where the knowledge came from, always pointing back to the teachers who had walked among them and then departed with a promise to return when the time was right. But here is what makes your skin prickle as you stand in this ancient city. Here is what transforms this from interesting history into genuine mystery. When modern researchers map the locations of the earliest cities, when they trace the spread of knowledge across the ancient world, they find patterns that suggest coordination, as if someone was deliberately seeding knowledge in specific locations at specific times, moving across the globe with purpose. The same architectural techniques appear in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, in the Indus Valley, in Peru, and in China, separated by vast distances and supposedly impossible to explain through normal cultural exchange. Yet the similarities are undeniable. Mass stone construction using blocks fitted with extraordinary precision, astronomical alignments built into city layouts and temple orientations, symbols that repeat across cultures with the same essential meanings, and most strikingly, stories that repeat as well. Stories of tall beings who came from the sky or from across the water, beings who taught humans the arts of civilization and then departed with promises to return. The Sumerians called them Anunnaki. The Egyptians knew them by other names. The peoples of the Indus Valley preserved their own version of the story, and halfway around the world in South America, civilizations that should have had no contact with Mesopotamia told remarkably similar tales of teachers who came from above. Either every ancient culture independently invented the same myth, which seems unlikely given the specific similarities, or they were all remembering the same event, the same presence, the same teachers who moved across the young world, leaving gifts of knowledge wherever they went. You walk deeper into the city, following a stone pathway that leads to a structure at its center, a temple or perhaps something else, a building whose purpose remains unclear, but whose construction defies easy explanation. The entrance is framed by massive pillars carved from single pieces of stone, each one covered in symbols that seem to shimmer slightly in the sunlight. And as you step inside, the temperature drops, the air grows still, and the light takes on a quality that feels both ancient and alive. The interior walls are smooth, unmarked by the tool marks you would expect to see on carved stone, and in the center of the main chamber, there is a platform made of a stone that does not match the geology of the surrounding region, a dark material shot through with veins of something that catches light like metal, but feels cool and slightly soft to the touch, almost organic. The Sumerians wrote that the Anunnaki built certain structures themselves, places where the boundary between their world and ours grew thin, places that served as meeting points, as gateways, as locations where messages could pass between the realm of earth and the realm of sky. They described these places as filled with a light that had no source, a sound that hummed just below the threshold of hearing, and an energy that made humans feel both small and strangely connected to something vast. Standing in this chamber, you begin to understand what they meant. There is a presence here, a weight in the air that has nothing to do with physical mass, and you realize that whatever this place was, it was not simply a temple for worship. It was something functional, something that served a purpose you do not yet understand. Some ancient texts speak of a hidden city, a place built by the Anunnaki themselves as a center of learning and power, a location where knowledge was stored and preserved, where the teachers lived when they walked among humans, and where they gathered before their departure from the world. The descriptions are frustratingly vague, obscured by the limitations of ancient language and the possibility that later scribes did not fully understand what they were copying, but certain details repeat across multiple sources. The city was described as a place of quiet light, not the harsh brightness of fire, but a soft illumination that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The air shimmered with energy that could be felt but not seen. Water flowed through channels without the need for pumps or gravity. And the buildings were arranged in patterns that mirrored the stars, creating on Earth what existed in the heavens. Some texts say this city was sealed when the Anunnaki departed, hidden from human eyes until the time of their return, and they left clues, markers that would point the way for those who knew how to read them, signs carved into stone and built into the landscape itself, waiting patiently through ages of forgetting. Modern explorers have found ruins that match some of these descriptions, structures so old that they predate known civilizations, built with techniques that remain mysterious, and located in places that align with ancient astronomical references. But whether any of these sites is the actual hidden city or merely an echo of it remains unclear. The search continues, driven by fragments of text and persistent legends, and some researchers believe that when 3i Atlas completes its journey, when the cycle reaches its peak, the location of the hidden city will be revealed, not through discovery but through awakening, as if the city itself is waiting for the right moment to show itself again. The Anunnaki were not depicted in ancient art as distant, untouchable gods. They were shown in ways that suggest physical presence, real interaction, genuine relationship with humanity. The carvings show them standing among humans, often taller, their proportions slightly different, their garments more elaborate, but clearly present in the same space, breathing the same air. They are shown teaching, their hands raised in gestures of instruction, surrounded by humans who watch with obvious attention and respect. They are shown holding objects, strange devices that do not match any known tools, things that look like they might be instruments for measurement or containers for something important, and in some cases, these objects seem to emit lines or waves, as if the artists were trying to depict energy or force rather than simple physical objects. One particularly interesting set of carvings shows an Anunnaki figure standing before what appears to be a map of the sky, pointing to specific stars while humans take notes on clay tablets. And when researchers match the star patterns shown in the carving to actual astronomical positions, they find that the map depicts the sky as it would have appeared thousands of years before the carving was made, as if the Anunnaki were showing humans not just where things are, but where they had been, teaching them to understand time through the movement of celestial bodies. These images suggest a level of interaction that goes beyond myth or symbol. They suggest actual presence, actual teaching, actual moments when knowledge passed from one kind of being to another. And the question becomes, if these beings were not simply mythological, if they were real in some sense, then where did they come from? And more importantly, where did they go? The Sumerian texts describe a moment of departure, a time when the Anunnaki gathered and made a decision to leave the world in the hands of humanity, to step back and allow humans to develop on their own without direct guidance. The reasons given for this departure are complex and sometimes contradictory. Some texts suggest it was part of a planned cycle, that the teachers always intended to leave once the foundation was laid. Others hint at disagreement among the Anunnaki themselves about how much help to provide. And still others speak of a great flood or catastrophe that changed the world and forced the teachers to withdraw. What remains consistent across the various accounts is the promise they made before leaving. They said they would return, not immediately, but after a great span of time, after humanity had grown and developed, after the world had cycled through certain changes, and the sign of their return would be visible in the sky. The red wanderer would appear again, following its ancient path, announcing that the cycle was beginning once more. They told the priests to watch the heavens, to keep the knowledge alive, to preserve the star maps and the calculations, because when the wanderer returned, the Anunnaki would not be far behind. This promise was carved into stone, baked into clay, woven into the founding myths of civilizations that would rise and fall over the following millennia, and it became the core of a belief system that persisted long after the original context was forgotten. The belief that the teachers would come back, that the gods would return, that the sky would open again, and those who had given humanity its start would appear once more to see what had been made of their gift. You stand now at the edge of the ancient city, looking back at the impossible architecture, the perfect stonework, the alignments that point toward stars, and you feel the weight of that promise pressing against the present moment. If the Anunnaki were real, if they truly walked among early humans and taught them everything that became the foundation of civilization, then their promise to return is not a myth, but a prophecy, a statement of intention that spans thousands of years. And if 3-Eye Atlas is truly the Red Wanderer of Sumerian legend, then we are living in the time of that return, standing at the threshold of a moment when the old teachers will look down at the world and see what humanity has become. But something troubles you as you think about this, something that makes the promise feel less like a gift and more like a test. Because the world we have built is not the world the Anunnaki left behind. We have taken the knowledge they gave us and expanded it in ways they might not have imagined. We have split atoms and decoded the building blocks of life. We have created machines that think and tools that can reshape the genetic code. We have reached into space and sent our own messages to the stars. And in doing all of this, we have stepped into the role that was once theirs, the role of creator, the role of teacher, the role of beings who shape the world according to their will. The question that haunts the edges of this story is simple and terrible. When the Anunnaki return and see what we have done, will they be pleased or will they be afraid? Maybe the hidden city is not a physical location at all, but a state of understanding, a way of seeing the world that becomes accessible only when humanity reaches a certain level of development. And maybe the sealing of that city was not about hiding it, but about ensuring that it would remain invisible until we were ready to understand what it contains. The ancient texts sometimes speak in metaphors that later readers took literally, and perhaps the hidden city is one of those metaphors, a way of saying that certain knowledge remains locked away not behind walls of stone, but behind walls of comprehension, waiting for the moment when human consciousness expands enough to perceive what has always been there. If this is true, then the return of the Red Wanderer is not bringing the Anunnaki back to Earth in ships or through physical travel. It is opening human perception to see what has always been present, and the hidden city will be revealed not by excavation, but by awakening, by a shift in how we understand reality itself. This interpretation makes the prophecy even more profound, because it suggests that the return is not something that happens to us, but something that happens within us, a transformation of consciousness triggered by celestial alignment and cosmic timing. And if we are standing at that threshold now, then the world is about to change in ways that have nothing to do with physical arrival and everything to do with expanded awareness, with seeing what was always true but previously invisible. Are you ready to follow this deeper? Because the Anunnaki left behind more than cities and symbols. They left behind a map, a path traced through space and time, a route that connects our world to theirs. And that route is followed by a world the Sumerians called Nibiru, a planet that moves on an orbit so vast and so slow that it touches our solar system only once in thousands of years. And when it approaches, everything changes. The balance shifts, the boundaries thin, and what was separated begins to reconnect. The hidden kingdom is not lost, it is waiting. And the key to finding it may lie not in digging through sand, but in following the path that Nibiru traces through the darkness, in understanding the route that connects world to world, teacher to student, past to future. And as 3-Eye Atlas continues its strange journey across our sky, some believe it is showing us that path, marking the way like a beacon in the night, saying, "Follow me, the time has come. The cycle is turning. The old teachers are drawing near, and the hidden things are preparing to reveal themselves again." Chapter 3. The Silent Route of Nibiru. You are standing now in a desert at night, far from any city, far from the glow of electric lights that bleach the stars from modern skies, and above you the heavens stretch in their full glory, thousands upon thousands of points of light scattered across the darkness like seeds thrown by an invisible hand. The air is cold and perfectly still, carrying no sound except the faint whisper of sand shifting beneath your feet. And you can feel the vastness pressing down on you, the sheer scale of space making you aware of how small you are, how brief your existence is against the backdrop of cosmic time. But you are not here simply to marvel at the stars. You are here because somewhere beyond the edge of what you can see, beyond the outermost planets that mark the boundary of the known solar system, something is moving. Something vast and slow, following a path that takes thousands of years to complete. A world the ancient Sumerians called Nibiru, and they believed this distant planet was not just another celestial body, but the home of the Anunnaki themselves, the place where the old teachers dwelt when they were not walking among humans. You try to imagine what such a world would be like, a planet whose orbit carries it so far from the sun that for most of its journey it exists in near total darkness, frozen and silent, moving through regions of space where the sun is just another star among many, no brighter than Venus appears from Earth, and then slowly, over centuries, beginning its long fall back toward the inner system, toward warmth and light, toward the moment when it would pass close enough to Earth for its influence to be felt, for its presence to change the balance of forces that govern our world. The Sumerians described Nibiru's path with surprising precision given the limitations of their technology. They wrote that this world did not move like the other wanderers. It did not trace a simple circle around the sun, but followed an ellipse so stretched and elongated that it dipped far below the plane where the other planets travel, disappearing into regions they called the deep waters of space, the dark ocean beyond the known lights. They said Nibiru's journey took a full Char to complete, a period of time they calculated as 3,600 years, though some scholars believe this number may be symbolic rather than literal, representing simply a very long time, an age, a span of years so great that no human would live to see the world complete 2 full orbits. Modern astronomy has confirmed that such orbits are not only possible, but actually exist. There are objects in our solar system that follow extremely elongated paths, comets that swing in from the outer darkness, make a brief fiery passage through the inner system, and then vanish again for centuries or millennia. And there is growing evidence that even larger bodies, planet-sized objects, may exist in the distant reaches beyond Neptune, following orbits so wide that we have not yet had time to observe a complete cycle. The hunt for what astronomers call Planet 9, a hypothetical world whose gravitational influence seems to be shepherding the orbits of smaller trans-Neptunian objects, has intensified in recent years, and while no direct observation has confirmed its existence, the mathematical models suggest something substantial is out there, something with enough mass to bend the paths of other objects, something that moves in the darkness beyond our current ability to see. The Sumerians would have called this world Nibiru, and they would have said that its approach marks the turning of an age, the moment when everything that was hidden begins to reveal itself again. You close your eyes and try to feel the movement of that distant world, try to sense its slow approach through the darkness, and in your mind you trace the path described in ancient texts, a path that begins in the frozen outer reaches, where sunlight is a distant memory, where ice and rock drift in eternal silence, and then curves inward, bending toward the warmth, accelerating as gravity pulls it closer, passing through the orbital paths of the outer giants, Jupiter and Saturn, feeling their influence tug at its trajectory, but continuing on, drawn by the sun's pull, until it reaches the region where Earth circles, the habitable zone, the place where water can flow and life can flourish. The Sumerians believed that Nibiru did not cross directly through the inner solar system, but passed nearby, close enough for its gravity to affect the other worlds, close enough for strange tides to rise in the oceans, for magnetic fields to fluctuate, for the delicate balance that keeps our climate stable to shift slightly. And they wrote that during these passages, the sky itself seemed to tremble, stars appearing to move from their fixed positions, planets shifting in their usual patterns, and new lights appearing where none had been before. Modern science would call these effects gravitational perturbation, the natural result of a massive object passing through a complex system of orbits. But to the ancient watchers, these were signs of divine presence, evidence that the home of the gods had drawn near, and they prepared themselves for what always followed such signs: change, transformation, the ending of one age and the beginning of another. But here is what makes your breath catch as you stand beneath this ancient sky. Here is what transforms this from astronomical theory into something more urgent and immediate. When astronomers study the strange behavior of Three-Eye Atlas, when they track its unexpected brightening and dimming, its shifts in trajectory that do not match the models, its energy signatures that suggest something more complex than a simple comet, some begin to wonder if this object is not moving alone through space, but responding to forces we cannot yet measure. Forces that might be generated by a massive, unseen body. A world whose gravitational influence reaches farther than we have calculated. And if such a world exists, if Nibiru is real and not merely mythological, then its orbit would explain many of the anomalies we observe. The clustering of trans-Neptunian objects into unusual patterns, the perturbations in the outer planet's movements that have puzzled researchers for decades, and, most strikingly, the appearance of interstellar visitors like Three-Eye Atlas that seem to arrive from directions and with velocities that do not quite fit the predictions. The ancient texts say that Nibiru sends messengers ahead of itself, smaller objects that precede its arrival like servants announcing a king. And the Red Wanderer was always understood to be one of these messengers, a sign that the great world was following somewhere behind, moving through the darkness on its ancient track. You open your eyes and look up at the stars again, and now they feel different. Now each point of light seems to carry a question. Which of these is not a star at all, but a distant world approaching? Which of these lights marks the position of Nibiru, moving slowly toward its moment of closest approach? And when that moment comes, what will happen to the fragile balance that has held our world stable for so long? The Sumerians were not fearful of Nibiru's return, or at least their texts do not convey terror, but rather a sense of inevitability, of cosmic rhythm, of the natural turning of a great wheel. They believed the universe operated in cycles, that everything that rises must fall, and everything that falls will rise again, that ages come and go like seasons, and Nibiru's orbit was simply the physical manifestation of this principle, the clock that marked the turning of cosmic time. When the distant world approached, it brought change, yes, but change is not the same as destruction, and the Sumerians saw these moments of transformation as opportunities, times when the old patterns could be broken and new possibilities could emerge, times when the boundary between the human realm and the realm of the gods grew thin enough for messages to pass through, for knowledge to flow again, for the teachers to return and see what their students had learned during the long absence. Some legends describe Nibiru as a world unlike any in our familiar system, a place where the laws of physics bend slightly, where time moves at a different pace, where the distinction between matter and energy is not as fixed as it seems here. They said the Anunnaki came from this world, born and raised in conditions that shaped them differently than Earth shaped humans, and this difference gave them abilities that seemed miraculous to early humans, but were simply natural expressions of their environment. The texts speak of Nibiru as a place of deep fire, suggesting intense internal heat despite its distance from the sun, possibly indicating a world with a molten core that generates its own warmth, making life possible even in the frozen outer darkness. and they describe dark oceans, vast seas of liquid that do not freeze despite the cold. Perhaps because of that internal heat. Perhaps because the liquid is not water, but something else. Something with a lower freezing point. And the air shimmers with a faint glow, bioluminescence perhaps, or some form of atmospheric energy that creates light without combustion. Modern exoplanet research has revealed that the universe contains worlds far stranger than anything in our solar system. Planets where it rains diamonds, where the atmosphere is thick with vaporized metals, where magnetic fields are so intense they strip away entire atmospheres. And if Nibiru exists, its long orbit would take it through regions of space where conditions are extreme, where radiation levels fluctuate wildly, where the influence of the galactic core creates effects we are only beginning to understand. And perhaps these conditions would indeed produce a world unlike anything we have experienced, a world that could give rise to beings unlike any we have known. You begin walking across the desert sand, following no particular direction, simply moving through the darkness while your mind traces the invisible path of that distant world. And you think about what it would mean if Nibiru truly exists. If somewhere beyond the edge of our vision, a planet is moving slowly toward us, carrying with it the Anunnaki, or at least the possibility of their return. Would we recognize them if they came back? Would their appearance match the descriptions carved in ancient stone? Or would they seem completely alien to us, so changed by their long isolation on a world unlike ours, that the connection between teacher and student would be severed by time and distance? The Sumerians believed the Anunnaki were fundamentally similar to humans, different in degree, but not in kind. Taller, perhaps, longer lived, certainly, more knowledgeable without question, but still beings who breathed air, who felt emotion, who could communicate and teach and form relationships. And this similarity was what made the exchange of knowledge possible, what allowed the teachers to instruct and the students to understand. But if Nibiru's environment is as strange as the legends suggest, if the beings who dwell there have spent thousands of years adapting to conditions we cannot imagine, then perhaps the Anunnaki who return would be so transformed that we would not recognize them as the teachers our ancestors knew. And the reunion we expect might become instead a meeting between strangers, each side struggling to remember what they once shared, struggling to bridge a gap that has grown too wide for simple recognition. The ancient texts describe a moment they called the crossing, a time when Nibiru's orbit would bring it closest to Earth, when the two worlds would be aligned in a configuration that opens what the Sumerians called a doorway between realms. Not a physical doorway, but a moment of cosmic geometry when communication becomes easier, when the distance between the home of the Anunnaki and the home of humanity shrinks to its minimum, and messages can flow with less distortion. They wrote that during the crossing, the sky would show specific signs, a particular arrangement of lights that had not appeared since the last cycle, and they taught their priests to watch for these signs, to record them carefully so that when the crossing came again, humanity would recognize it and prepare accordingly. Modern astronomers study celestial alignments all the time, tracking the movements of planets and moons, predicting conjunctions and oppositions with extraordinary precision. But they do so with an understanding that these alignments are simply geometric relationships, interesting patterns that have no deeper significance beyond their mathematical elegance. The Sumerians saw alignments differently. They believed geometry was not merely descriptive, but causative. That when celestial bodies arranged themselves in certain patterns, those patterns created conditions, opened channels, made possible things that were impossible at other times. And the crossing of Nibiru past Earth was the most significant alignment of all, the moment when the great cycle completed itself and prepared to begin again. If 3i Atlas is truly following the path described in ancient texts, if its trajectory matches the route that Sumerian star watchers recorded thousands of years ago, Then the logical question becomes whether something else is following the same path, whether the Red Wanderer is indeed a messenger announcing the approach of something larger. And if Nibiru exists, if it is real and not merely mythological, then we should be able to detect it, not with naked eyes perhaps, but with the instruments we have developed. The telescopes that can see into the infrared and detect heat signatures from incredibly distant objects, the gravitational sensors that can measure the tiniest perturbations in planetary orbits. The search continues, astronomers scanning the outer reaches of the solar system, looking for any sign of a massive object that should not be there according to our current models. And while nothing has been conclusively identified, the evidence continues to accumulate. Small hints and suggestions that something substantial exists in the darkness beyond our current vision. And if that something is Nibiru, then the ancient prophecy is not myth, but observation. Not religious belief, but astronomical record. And the return the Sumerians predicted is not a supernatural event, but a natural cycle. The orbit of a world completing its journey and bringing with it all the changes that such a passage entails. You stop walking and stand perfectly still, letting the silence of the desert wrap around you like a blanket. And you feel something you cannot name, a presence in the darkness, a weight in the air that has nothing to do with physical atmosphere. And you wonder if this is what the ancient priests felt when they stood on their ziggurats watching the Red Wanderer move across the sky. This sense that something vast and patient is approaching, that the universe is shifting its weight, preparing for a moment that has been building for thousands of years. The Sumerians wrote that when Nibiru draws near, the world holds its breath. And you understand now what they meant. There is a quality to this moment, a stillness that feels like anticipation, like the pause before a storm breaks, or the silence before dawn. And you realize that whether Nibiru is a physical planet or a metaphor for cosmic cycles, whether the Anunnaki are beings of flesh or symbols of forces we do not yet understand, the feeling is the same. Something is changing, something is approaching, and the world we have known is preparing to transform into something we have not yet imagined. Are you ready to step deeper into this mystery? Because the approach of Nibiru was never supposed to be a secret. The Sumerians left us a map, a prophecy written not in vague religious language, but in precise astronomical terms. And that prophecy was recorded by the old teacher Enki himself, the one who understood the deep waters and the hidden paths, the one who loved humanity enough to warn us about what was coming. And his tablet, his message from thousands of years ago, speaks directly to this moment, to the time when the Red Wanderer returns, and the distant world begins its final approach. And what he wrote has been waiting all this time for us to read it again, to understand it differently, to see that the prophecy is not about destruction, but about choice, about the moment when humanity must decide who we are and what we will become when the old teachers return and see what we have made of their gift. Chapter 4. Enki's Prophecy. You are kneeling now in a chamber deep beneath the earth, in a place that was hidden for thousands of years until archaeologists broke through the sealed entrance and found what lay within. A room carved from solid rock, its walls covered in symbols that still hold their sharpness despite the millennia that have passed since they were inscribed. The air here is cool and dry, perfectly preserved by the darkness and the depth, and in your hands you hold a clay tablet, not an original, but a careful reproduction of one that rests in a museum somewhere far from this place. And yet, even this copy carries weight, carries meaning, carries a message that was meant to survive across ages of forgetting. This is the tablet of Enki, the old teacher, the one the Sumerians called the Lord of the Deep Waters, the one who understood not just the surface of things, but the hidden currents that flow beneath, the patterns that connect earth and sky, past and future, human and divine. The tablet was found in the ruins of Eridu, the oldest city, the place where the Sumerians said civilization first began, and it was buried with care, placed in a sealed container, surrounded by protective symbols, as if whoever placed it there wanted to ensure it would survive, wanted to make certain that when the time came, when the cycle turned again, this message would be here, waiting for those who knew how to read it. You run your fingers gently across the surface, feeling the wedge-shaped marks pressed into the clay by a hand that worked 5,000 years ago, and you begin to translate the ancient cuneiform, speaking the words softly into the silence of the chamber, words that have waited so long to be heard again. The tablet begins with a date, not a simple calendar notation, but an astronomical configuration, a description of where certain stars and planets stood in the sky at the moment the words were written. And when modern researchers calculate backward to match this configuration, they find it corresponds to a time approximately 3,000 years before the Common Era, a period when Sumerian civilization was at its height, but also beginning to sense the changes that would eventually lead to its transformation and decline. Enki writes that he is recording this message during a time of great council, a gathering of the Anunnaki to discuss what they call the turning of the wheel. And he describes the council taking place not in a physical temple, but in what he calls the Hall Between Worlds, a space that exists outside normal geography, a meeting place that can be accessed only when certain celestial conditions align. The council, according to Enki's account, was called because the Anunnaki had observed humanity's development and had reached a point where decisions needed to be made about how much further involvement was appropriate, whether to continue guiding human civilization directly or to step back and allow humanity to find its own path. And this question had divided them, creating two perspectives that Enki describes with remarkable clarity. On one side stood Enlil, the strict guardian, who believed humanity was progressing too quickly, learning too much too fast, developing technologies and capabilities that might eventually challenge the authority and even the safety of the teachers themselves. And Enlil argued for withdrawal, for ending the direct instruction and allowing humanity to develop more slowly, more carefully, under its own direction. On the other side stood Enki himself, who believed that humanity's rapid growth was not a danger, but a gift, evidence that the teaching had been successful, that humans were capable of taking the knowledge they had been given and expanding it in new directions. And he argued for continued support, for remaining present as guides, even as humans began to walk on their own. But here is what makes the tablet extraordinary. Here is what transforms it from a simple historical record into genuine prophecy. Enki writes that the council made a decision. They agreed to withdraw, to step back from direct involvement, but they also agreed to return, and they specified exactly when and how that return would happen. The tablet describes what Enki calls the meeting of the two fire stars, a celestial event that would mark the end of one age and the beginning of another, and he provides specific details about what would be visible in the sky when this moment arrived. The first fire star, he writes, would be the Red Wanderer, the messenger that humanity already knew, the light that followed the ancient path and appeared in the sky when the cycle was beginning to turn. And this wanderer would move differently than other lights. It would brighten and dim in patterns that seemed to respond to invisible forces, and it would trace an arc through the heavens that matched the route described in the oldest star maps. The second fire star, according to Enki, would be Nibiru itself, the homeworld of the Anunnaki, approaching from the deep waters of space, drawing close enough that its influence could be felt, but not so close that its presence would cause destruction. And when these two lights appeared together in the sky, when the wanderer and the world aligned in a specific configuration that Enki carefully describes, that would be the sign that the withdrawal was ending, that the teachers were preparing to return, and that humanity would face what he calls the moment of weighing. The moment of weighing, as Enki describes it, is not a judgment in the sense of punishment or reward. It is an assessment, an observation, a careful examination of what humanity has become during the long period of independence. He writes that when the two fire stars meet, the Anunnaki will look upon the Earth and see what humans have accomplished without direct guidance. They will measure the progress, not in terms of technology alone, but in terms of wisdom. Not in terms of power, but in terms of balance. And they will ask a simple question that carries profound implications. Has humanity grown in ways that honor the gift of knowledge? Or has humanity grown in ways that endanger the fabric of existence itself? Enki emphasizes that this is not a question with a predetermined answer. The future is not fixed, and the return of the Anunnaki could lead to either renewed partnership or to what he calls the Great Correction, a period when the imbalances created by rapid growth without wisdom would need to be adjusted, when humanity would face consequences not as punishment, but as natural results of choices made during the time of independence. The tablet makes clear that Enki himself hoped for the first outcome. He believed humanity was capable of wisdom, capable of using knowledge responsibly. And he left this message partly as a warning, but also as encouragement, as a way of telling future generations that they had been given not just knowledge, but also trust, and that the return of the teachers would be a moment to demonstrate that this trust was justified. You set the tablet down carefully and look at the walls of the chamber, at the symbols carved there, and you begin to see them differently now, not as random decoration, but as a map, a guide, a set of instructions for how to recognize the signs when they appear. The walls show star patterns, specific configurations that would mark different stages of the cycle. And when you compare these patterns to what modern astronomers observe in the current sky, the correlation is unsettling. The configuration shown in one section matches almost exactly the positions of Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars during the period when 3-Eye Atlas first appeared, and another section shows a pattern that will not occur until several years from now, a future alignment that the ancient carvers somehow knew to depict. Some researchers suggest these carvings are simply artistic representations of mythological scenes, but others argue that the precision is too great for coincidence, that whoever created these images had access to astronomical knowledge that should not have been available in the ancient world. And the most logical explanation, though also the most challenging for conventional history, is that the Anunnaki themselves left these markers, that Enki, or others like him, carved these walls before their departure, leaving behind not just words, but visual guides that would help future generations recognize when the prophecy was beginning to unfold. The tablet continues with a description of what Enki calls the gate between worlds. And this section has puzzled translators for decades because the language becomes metaphorical, shifting from concrete astronomical descriptions to something more abstract and philosophical. Enki writes that the meeting of the two fire stars creates not a physical opening, but a moment in time, a period when the boundaries that normally separate different levels of existence grow thin, become permeable, allow passage not just for beings, but for ideas, for knowledge, for understanding that normally remains locked away. He describes this gate as existing simultaneously in the sky and in human consciousness, suggesting that the alignment of celestial bodies somehow affects the awareness of those watching from Earth. And he writes that during the time when the gate is open, humans will experience things they cannot easily explain, visions that seem more real than dreams, insights that arrive fully formed without the usual process of learning, and a sense of presence, of being watched or guided by something that exists just beyond the threshold of normal perception. Modern readers might interpret this as purely symbolic, a poetic way of describing psychological or spiritual transformation. But Enki's language suggests he understood it as quite literal, that the alignment of massive celestial bodies creates measurable effects on electromagnetic fields, on gravitational forces, on the subtle energies that science is only beginning to understand, and these effects ripple through space and touch the consciousness of beings sensitive enough to perceive them. The most mysterious part of the tablet comes near the end, where Enki includes what appears to be a drawing, a simple geometric figure consisting of two circles connected by a line, with smaller marks arranged around them in a pattern that resembles a star map, but does not quite match any known constellation. For years, scholars assumed this drawing was decorative or symbolic, but recent analysis using computer modeling has revealed something extraordinary. When the drawing is interpreted as a three-dimensional diagram rather than a flat image, when the circles are understood as representing spheres at different distances from a central point, and when the connecting line is seen as a trajectory rather than a simple connection, the diagram becomes a map of an orbital path. And that path matches, with remarkable precision, the calculated orbit of the hypothetical Planet 9 that modern astronomers have been searching for. The smaller marks around the circles, when measured against the scale implied by the main diagram, correspond to positions along this orbit at different points in time, creating what amounts to an ancient prediction of where the object would be located during its long journey through space. If this interpretation is correct, then Enki was not simply describing a prophecy, but providing specific data, giving future generations the information they would need to verify the prediction, to look at the right place in the sky at the right time, and see for themselves that what the ancients described was real, observable, and precisely where they said it would be. You stand now and walk slowly around the chamber, studying the walls, the ceiling, the floor, looking for additional clues. And you notice something that changes your understanding of the entire space. The chamber is not simply a room carved from rock. It is designed with acoustic properties that amplify sound in specific ways, creating resonances at particular frequencies. And when you speak aloud, when you read the words of Enki's tablet in this space, the sound waves interact with the stone in ways that make the voice seem to come from everywhere at once, as if the chamber itself is speaking. Some ancient sites are known to have been designed with similar acoustic properties, temples where the architecture creates sonic effects that enhance ritual and ceremony. But this chamber is different because the resonance is not random. It emphasizes certain tones, certain frequencies, and when researchers have measured these frequencies and compared them to modern understanding of how sound affects human consciousness, they find that the emphasized tones fall within ranges known to induce altered states of awareness, to facilitate what some call transcendent experiences. The chamber was designed not just to preserve Enki's message in written form, but to create an environment where reading that message becomes a transformative experience, where the words combine with sound and space to open perception, to thin the boundary between normal awareness and the expanded consciousness that Enki described as necessary for understanding what the prophecy truly means. The final lines of the tablet shift in tone, becoming more personal, more direct, as if Enki is speaking not to his own time, but across the ages to those who would read his words in the distant future. He writes that he knows the message will survive, that the clay will endure when softer materials have turned to dust, and he expresses hope that when the two fire stars meet again, when the cycle completes its long turning, humanity will have grown in wisdom as well as knowledge, in compassion as well as power. He acknowledges the fear that some will feel when the sky begins to change, when the signs appear and the old stories suddenly seem less like myth and more like memory. But he encourages those who come after to meet the moment not with terror, but with curiosity, not with resistance, but with openness, because the return of the teachers is not an ending, but a beginning, not a judgment, but an invitation to step into a larger understanding of what existence can be. The very last line, written in characters that seem slightly different from the rest, as if added by a different hand or at a different time, reads simply this: "The gate opens when the world is ready, not when the stars align, but when the hearts of those watching are prepared to see what has always been there, waiting in the silence between breaths, in the space between worlds, in the moment when fear transforms into wonder, and the old teachers return to find their students have become teachers in their own right. You kneel again before the tablet, and you feel the weight of what Enki preserved here, not just information, but intention, not just a warning, but a gift, a way of telling those who would come thousands of years later that they are not alone, that they are part of a story that spans ages and worlds, and that the changes they fear may be the very changes they have been waiting for all along. The prophecy is not about what will happen to us, but about what we will choose when the moment arrives. And as Three-Eye Atlas continues its strange journey across our modern sky, as astronomers search for signs of the distant world that may be following, as the patterns described in ancient tablets begin to match the patterns we observe in the heavens above us, the question Enki asked 5,000 years ago becomes urgent and immediate. Are we ready? Have we grown in ways that honor the knowledge we were given? And when the two fire stars meet, when the gate between worlds stands open once more, will we step through with wisdom or with fear, with openness or with denial, with the humility to admit that the universe is stranger and more beautiful than our current understanding allows? The chamber seems to darken around you, though no light has changed, and in that darkness you sense something approaching, not physically but temporally, not through space but through time, and you understand that the prophecy is not something that will happen in some distant future. It is happening now, unfolding in this moment, in the movements of celestial bodies and in the choices humans make each day. And the return Enki described is not a single event but a process, a gradual revealing that has already begun, and will continue until the moment when what was hidden becomes visible to all who have eyes to see it, and the silence that is held for thousands of years finally breaks. And the old teachers speak again, not from the past, but from the eternal present that exists beyond time, waiting patiently for humanity to remember what it once knew and step forward into the partnership that was always meant to be. Chapter 5. The Conflict of the Gods. You are standing now in a space that exists outside normal time, in what the Sumerians called the Hall Between Worlds. And though you know this place cannot be real in the ordinary sense, cannot be touched or measured or photographed, it feels more solid than anything you have experienced in waking life. The hall stretches in all directions, its boundaries unclear, its walls seeming to be made of something between stone and light, and the air shimmers with a quality that makes everything appear slightly more vivid, more present, more significant than things appear in the ordinary world. You're here because the ancient texts describe this place, because Enki's tablet spoke of councils held in spaces that existed outside geography, and because to understand the conflict that shaped humanity's fate, you must witness it not as history, but as immediate experience, as something happening now, in the eternal present, where all moments exist simultaneously. Before you stand two figures, tall and luminous, their forms human enough to recognize, but different in ways that make it clear they are not quite human. Their proportions slightly elongated, their movements carrying a grace that suggests they experience gravity differently than you do, and their eyes hold a depth that makes you feel they can see not just your physical form, but the thoughts moving behind your face, the fears and hopes that shape your understanding of the world. These are Enki and Enlil, the old teachers, the ones whose disagreement would determine whether humanity would be guided or abandoned, protected or tested. And as you watch them, you begin to understand that what the ancients called a conflict of gods was really something simpler and more profound. A disagreement about love, about how much help is too much help, about when protection becomes imprisonment and when freedom becomes danger. Enlil speaks first, his voice carrying the weight of responsibility, the burden of someone who has watched civilizations rise and fall, who has seen patterns repeat across worlds and ages, and who knows how quickly progress can turn into catastrophe when beings acquire power faster than they acquire wisdom. He says that humanity is moving too quickly, that the knowledge given by the Anunnaki has been taken and expanded in directions the teachers did not anticipate, and while this demonstrates human creativity and intelligence, it also demonstrates human recklessness, the tendency to push boundaries without fully understanding what lies beyond them. Enlil describes watching humans learn to shape metal, and within generations, using that knowledge to create weapons that can kill from a distance. Watching humans learn to cultivate plants, and then using that knowledge to create imbalances in nature that ripple forward, causing famines and collapses. Watching humans learn to organize societies, and then using that knowledge to build hierarchies that concentrate power in dangerous ways. He argues that each gift of knowledge has been transformed by human hands into something the teachers did not intend, not because humans are evil, but because they are young, because they lack the long perspective that comes only from living through multiple cycles, from seeing how actions that seem beneficial in the short term create problems that emerge only after centuries have passed. Enlil believes the solution is clear. The Anunnaki must withdraw, must stop providing new knowledge, must allow humanity to develop more slowly under its own direction. And if this means progress takes longer, if it means some of the advances made possible by direct teaching are lost or delayed, that loss is preferable to the alternative, which is humanity acquiring godlike powers while still thinking in human timescales, still driven by human emotions, still limited by human perspective. Enki listens with the patience of someone who has heard these arguments before, who understands them and respects them even while disagreeing. And when Enlil finishes, Enki responds not with anger, but with a different story, a different way of seeing the same events. He says that yes, humans have taken the gifts of knowledge and used them in ways the teachers did not predict. But this is not a failure of humanity. It is a success. It is evidence that humans are not simply copying what they were taught, but genuinely learning, genuinely thinking, genuinely creating new possibilities that even the Anunnaki did not imagine. Enki describes the same progression Enlil mentioned, but frames it differently. Humans learned metallurgy and created weapons, true, but they also created tools that allowed them to build on scales previously impossible, to feed populations that would have starved, to protect communities from dangers that would have destroyed them. Humans learned agriculture and created imbalances, yes, but they also created abundance, freed themselves from the constant search for food, gave themselves time to develop art and philosophy and science, transformed themselves from creatures who lived day to day into beings who could plan for generations. Humans learned social organization and created hierarchies, certainly, but they also created systems that allowed thousands of people to cooperate, to pool their knowledge and their labor, to accomplish things no individual could achieve alone. Enki argues that the pattern Enlil sees as dangerous is actually the pattern of growth, the natural process by which any intelligent species learns not just what to do, but who they are, what they value, what kind of world they want to create. And this process necessarily involves mistakes, involves pushing too far and then pulling back, involves creating problems and then solving them. Because this is how wisdom develops, not through being given answers, but through wrestling with questions. But here is where the conflict deepens. Here is where the disagreement moves beyond tactics and touches something fundamental about the nature of existence itself. Enlil believes there are boundaries that should not be crossed, knowledge that should not be given, powers that should remain in the hands of those who have demonstrated over long ages that they can wield them responsibly. And he points to specific examples, to moments in history when humans came close to discoveries that could have destroyed them, to technologies that were abandoned or hidden because the teachers recognized they were too dangerous for beings who had not yet developed the wisdom to use them safely. He speaks of attempts to manipulate life at its most fundamental level, to create new forms of existence by blending characteristics from different species, to shape consciousness itself by altering the structures of the brain. And he says these experiments were stopped not because they failed, but because they succeeded too well, because they opened doors that led to places humanity was not ready to go. Enlil argues that the Anunnaki have a responsibility to prevent certain kinds of knowledge from spreading, to act as guardians not just of humanity, but of the larger fabric of existence that could be torn by careless actions. And he believes this guardianship is not oppression, but love. The kind of love that says no, even when saying yes would be easier. The kind of love that accepts being misunderstood or even hated, if that is the price of preventing catastrophe. Enki hears this and responds with his own understanding of love, an understanding that values freedom even when freedom leads to pain, that trusts growth even when growth involves falling, that believes the greatest gift the Anunnaki can give humanity is not protection, but confidence. The knowledge that humans are capable of finding their own way, making their own choices, and living with the consequences of those choices. Enki admits that humans will make mistakes, that some of those mistakes will be serious, that knowledge will sometimes be misused, and powers will sometimes be abused. But he argues that preventing these mistakes by withholding knowledge is not actually preventing anything. It is simply delaying the moment when humanity must face these challenges. And delayed challenges do not become easier with time. They become harder, because the beings facing them have not developed the strength that comes from struggling with smaller challenges along the way. Enki believes that if the Anunnaki truly want humanity to mature, to become partners rather than students, teachers in their own right rather than eternal children, then the only path is to step back, to allow humans to take full responsibility for their own development, and to trust that the foundation laid during the age of direct teaching was strong enough to support the weight of that responsibility. He acknowledges the risk. He sees the same dangers Enlil sees, but he interprets those dangers differently, not as reasons to maintain control, but as signs that the time for control is ending, that humanity is approaching the threshold where they must either be trusted or abandoned entirely. And he argues for trust, for the belief that beings who were created with the capacity for wisdom will eventually develop that wisdom if given the space and time to do so. You watch these two figures, these ancient teachers, and you realize that their conflict is not really about humanity at all, or rather, it is about humanity only as a reflection of a deeper question that every parent, every teacher, every being who nurtures another must eventually face. When do you let go? How do you know when the student is ready to walk alone? And what do you do if you believe the student is not ready, but the student insists on walking anyway? The Sumerians recorded this conflict as a story about gods, but it is really a story about the universal tension between protection and freedom, between the desire to prevent suffering and the recognition that some suffering is necessary for growth, between the fear of what might go wrong and the hope of what might go right. Standing in this hall between worlds, listening to arguments that were made thousands of years ago, but feel immediately relevant to the choices facing humanity today, you begin to understand that the conflict was never resolved, that Enki and Enlil reached a compromise that satisfied neither of them completely, agreeing to withdraw, but also to return, to give humanity time to develop independently, but also to check back when certain signs appeared, to trust, but also to verify. And this compromise is what created the prophecy, what established the cycle that would bring the teachers back when the two fire stars met, when enough time had passed for humanity to demonstrate what they had become in the absence of direct guidance. The hall begins to fade around you, the figures of Enki and Enlil becoming translucent, their voices growing distant. and you understand that you are being pulled back into ordinary time, back into the present moment where the ancient conflict has become a modern question. Today, we stand at exactly the point the old teachers argued about. We have taken the knowledge we were given and expanded it into territories they could not have imagined. We have split atoms and decoded genomes. We have created artificial minds that can learn and reason. We have reached into space and left our mark on other worlds. And we have done all of this in the span of a few generations, moving at a pace that would have seemed impossible to any previous age. If Enlil could see us now, he would see his fears confirmed. We have developed godlike powers while still driven by human desires, still shaped by human limitations, still capable of using our knowledge to harm as well as to help. And he would argue that the withdrawal was a mistake, that humanity needed more time, more guidance, more restriction before being given the freedom to develop so rapidly. But if Enki could see us now, he would see his hopes vindicated. We have not destroyed ourselves, despite having the power to do so. We have created beauty and meaning and connection, even while struggling with violence and inequality and fear. We have reached toward the stars, not just physically but philosophically, asking the deep questions about who we are and what we might become. And he would argue that humanity has earned the right to be considered not as children, but as young adults, not as students, but as junior partners, beings who still have much to learn, but who are learning through their own efforts, their own choices, their own slow transformation from creatures who receive knowledge to beings who create knowledge, who shape not just their own world, but potentially many worlds. The question the ancient conflict poses to us is simple and impossible. Which perspective is correct? Has humanity grown in ways that justify the trust Enki placed in us? Or have we developed in ways that confirm the fears Enlil expressed? The answer matters, because if the prophecy is real, if the return is coming, if the two fire stars truly mark a moment when the old teachers will look upon humanity again, then what they see will determine what happens next, whether the return brings renewed partnership or what Enki called the Great Correction, whether humanity is welcomed into a larger community of conscious beings, or whether we face restrictions designed to prevent us from endangering not just ourselves, but the broader fabric of existence that our actions now have the power to affect. You cannot answer this question alone. No individual can. Because it is a question about collective humanity, about what we have become as a species during the long absence of the teachers. And the answer will be written not in words, but in the reality we have created, in the world we have built, in the choices we continue to make each day as we move closer to the moment when the sky will show the signs described in ancient tablets, and the silence that is held for thousands of years will finally break. As you return fully to the present moment, as the hall between worlds releases you back into ordinary consciousness, you carry with you an understanding that transforms how you see the lights moving in the night sky. 3i Atlas is not just an astronomical object. It is a question mark, a sign that asks whether we are ready, whether the time has come for humanity to step into the next stage of its development. And Nibiru, if it follows as the ancients said it would, is not a threat, but a mirror, a presence that will reflect back to us what we have become, forcing us to see ourselves not through human eyes, but through the eyes of beings who have watched us grow, who have given us gifts, and then stepped back to see what we would do with those gifts, and who now return not to judge in the sense of condemning, but to assess in the sense of understanding, to measure not whether we deserve to continue, but what kind of future is possible for beings like us, beings who hold both creation and destruction in their hands and must choose each moment which one to express. Chapter 6. The Signs in the Sky. You are standing now in an observatory somewhere high in the mountains, far from the light pollution of cities, where the air is thin and cold, and the stars shine with a clarity that takes your breath away. Before you sits a computer screen displaying data streaming in real time from a telescope pointed toward a specific region of space, a region where 3-eye Atlas moves with its strange, purposeful drift. And as you watch the numbers scroll past, the brightness measurements fluctuating in patterns that do not match any natural model, you feel a chill that has nothing to do with the temperature of the room. This is not the excitement of discovering something new. This is the unease of recognizing something old, something that was predicted thousands of years ago, and is now unfolding exactly as the ancient tablets said it would. And you realize that you are not simply observing a cosmic event. You are witnessing the beginning of a return, the first visible signs of a cycle completing its long turn. The astronomers around you speak in careful professional language, discussing orbital mechanics and spectroscopic analysis. But beneath their words you hear something else, a note of uncertainty, of puzzlement, of the quiet admission that what they are seeing does not fit comfortably into the categories they have built to explain the universe. 3-eye Atlas behaves like something that knows where it is going, like something that responds to forces they cannot measure. And while science demands they search for natural explanations, you can see in their eyes the question they do not ask aloud, the question that would sound too strange in a place dedicated to rational inquiry, but the question that grows louder with each anomalous reading. What if the ancients were right? What if this wanderer is not just ice and rock, but something more? Something connected to intelligences that moved through space long before humanity learned to look up and wonder. The data shows that 3-eye Atlas brightened suddenly 3 weeks ago, its luminosity increasing by a factor that should not be possible for an object of its composition at its distance from the sun. And then, just as suddenly, it dimmed again, returning to expected levels before beginning a gradual increase that continues still. The pattern resembles nothing in the astronomical literature. No known comet behaves this way, and the spectroscopic analysis reveals traces of elements that should not exist in the ratios detected, metallic signatures that suggest either a composition unlike any natural body or contamination from some source the instruments cannot identify. Some researchers suggest the object is outgassing in unusual patterns, releasing frozen volatiles that create temporary brightening. But this explanation does not account for the regularity of the pattern, the way the brightness pulses with a rhythm that feels almost deliberate, almost like a signal. And when one young astronomer half-jokingly runs the brightness variations through a pattern recognition algorithm designed to detect artificial signals, the program returns a result that makes everyone in the room go quiet. It identifies a repeating sequence, a mathematical progression that appears in the timing of the pulses. And while this could still be coincidence, could still be some natural resonance they do not yet understand, the possibility that it might be intentional, that something about this object is trying to communicate, hangs in the air like smoke, uncomfortable and impossible to ignore. You step outside the observatory into the cold mountain night, needing to see the sky directly rather than through the mediation of instruments and screens. And as your eyes adjust to the darkness, the universe reveals itself in its full glory. The Milky Way stretching overhead like a river of light, planets visible as steady points among the flickering stars, and somewhere out there, too faint for naked eyes but growing brighter each day, 3-eye Atlas following its ancient path. Standing here, breathing the thin, cold air, feeling the vastness pressing down on you from above, you remember the Sumerian texts that described this moment, the return of the Red Wanderer, accompanied by signs that would appear across the world, not just in the sky, but in the earth and air and water. Subtle shifts that would mark the thinning of boundaries, the opening of the gate between worlds. And you wonder if these signs are already manifesting, if the strangeness people have been reporting from different corners of the globe might be connected to the approach of this object. might be early indications that the cycle is not just astronomical, but also affects the world in ways that science does not yet have tools to measure. Reports have been accumulating for months now, strange sounds heard in places where no sound should be, long, low tones that seem to come from the sky itself, metallic groans that echo across valleys and deserts. And while researchers offer explanations involving atmospheric conditions or industrial noise, the sounds continue in locations far from any human activity, in wilderness areas where the only witnesses are animals who respond with obvious agitation, gathering in unusual numbers, or fleeing regions they have inhabited for generations. Electromagnetic disturbances have been increasing as well, brief fluctuations in power grids that engineers cannot trace to any source, radio interference that appears and disappears without pattern, and compass variations that suggest the magnetic field itself is shifting in ways that do not match the slow, predictable changes science has documented. None of these events are dramatic enough to cause widespread alarm. They are small anomalies, easily dismissed individually, but when mapped together, when the locations and timings are plotted on a globe, a pattern emerges that makes you pause. The disturbances cluster along certain lines, certain trajectories that mirror the path 3-eye Atlas traces across the sky, as if the object is leaving a wake, not just through space, but through the invisible fields that surround our world. And this correlation, like so much else, could be coincidence, could be the result of looking for patterns in random noise, but it could also be exactly what the Sumerians said would happen when the Wanderer returned, that its presence would affect not just what we see, but what we feel. Not just the physical world, but the subtle energies that flow through it. Some people have reported changes in their dreams during this period, vivid experiences that feel more real than ordinary dreams, encounters with places they have never been and beings they have never met. And while dream analysis is not something mainstream science takes seriously, the reports are consistent enough across different cultures and locations to deserve attention. People describe similar imagery, similar feelings, similar messages that seem to come from outside their own minds, and a few even report seeing symbols in their dreams that they later recognize when they encounter ancient Sumerian or Egyptian hieroglyphs, symbols they insist they had never seen before the dream. As if some form of information is being transmitted not through conscious channels, but through the deeper layers of mind that become accessible during sleep. Animals have been behaving strangely as well, patterns documented by field researchers who track wildlife movements and breeding cycles. Birds have been migrating at unusual times, following routes that deviate from established patterns, and some species have been gathering in enormous flocks for no apparent reason, creating formations in the sky that seem almost purposeful, almost like they are trying to communicate something through their collective movement. Whales and dolphins have been appearing in regions where they are rarely seen, and their vocalizations have changed, incorporating new frequencies and patterns that marine biologists cannot explain. Even domestic animals seem affected, dogs barking at empty sky, cats staring fixedly at points where nothing visible exists, horses refusing to enter areas they previously traveled without concern. And while skeptics point out that animals are always behaving in ways humans do not fully understand, the clustering of these behaviors, the way they have all increased during the same period when 3-eye Atlas has been visible, suggests a connection that deserves more than dismissal. The Sumerians wrote that animals sense the approach of the divine before humans do, that they respond to changes in the invisible world that human consciousness filters out, and they instructed their priests to watch animal behavior as carefully as they watched the stars, because the two forms of observation together provided a more complete picture of what was actually happening, not just in the physical realm, but in the space between physical and spiritual, the realm the ancients understood better than we do, because they had not yet divided existence into categories that make connection invisible. You return to the observatory and find the team gathered around a new data set, something that has just come in from a radio telescope array that was pointed toward 3-eye Atlas as part of a broader survey. and what they have detected makes no sense according to any natural process. The object is emitting radio waves, not the random static that many celestial bodies produce, but organized pulses, a repeating pattern that persists for hours before stopping and then resuming with slight variations. And while the pattern is not complex enough to constitute a message in any obvious sense, it is far too regular to be random, too precise to be the product of natural resonance or interference. One researcher suggests it might be the signature of some kind of internal structure, something rotating inside the object that creates the regular pulses. But this raises more questions than it answers, because natural objects do not develop internal rotating structures. That requires either formation processes we do not understand or engineering. And no one wants to say the word engineering in connection with an interstellar object. No one wants to open that door. But the data sits there demanding explanation, demanding that someone acknowledge what the pattern suggests, even if acknowledging it means stepping outside the boundaries of accepted science into territory that feels more like the ancient prophecies than modern astronomy. The sky outside the observatory windows is beginning to lighten, dawn approaching to wash away the stars, and you realize you have been here all night, watching data stream in, watching the signs accumulate, watching the universe behave in ways that make the ancient warnings feel less like myth and more like memory. Like humanity has been here before, has witnessed this before, and preserved the knowledge in the only forms that could survive across millennia, in stories and symbols and tablets baked hard enough to last until the cycle turned again. If you are enjoying this journey through the signs appearing in our modern sky, leave a like so more people can discover these quiet investigations into mysteries that connect past and present. And stay with us, because what comes next moves from observation to meaning, from data to understanding, from the question of what is happening to the deeper question of why. And that brings us to the name, the strange resonance between ancient symbolism and modern designation, the mystery of why this wandering object carries the name Atlas, and what that name might tell us about the role this visitor plays in the unfolding prophecy. The Sumerians believed that names carried power, that to name something correctly was to understand its essence, its purpose, its place in the cosmic order, and they spent great effort determining the proper names for celestial objects, consulting the old records, comparing observations across generations, seeking to maintain continuity with the original names given by the Anunnaki themselves. When modern astronomers named the interstellar visitor 3I Atlas, they followed a bureaucratic process, a catalog designation combined with a survey name, nothing mystical or profound, just the practical requirements of tracking thousands of objects through space. But the name they chose, whether by accident or intuition, connects to symbolism that runs deep through multiple ancient cultures. The image of a being who holds up the sky, who carries the weight of the heavens on their shoulders, who serves as the bridge between Earth and the realm above. In Greek mythology, Atlas was the titan condemned to hold up the celestial sphere, but similar figures appear in Sumerian, Egyptian, and even distant South American traditions, always depicted as standing at the boundary between worlds, always shown bearing weight that ordinary beings could not carry, and the Sumerians specifically connected this imagery to the Red Wanderer, to the object that moved between the realm of the gods and the realm of humans, carrying messages, marking transitions, announcing the approach of those who dwelt in the distant heights. Standing here as dawn breaks, watching the last stars fade into the brightening sky, you understand that the signs are not just appearing in data and instruments, they are appearing in the synchronicities, in the connections that feel too precise to be accidental, in the way modern science and ancient prophecy seem to be converging on the same conclusion from different directions, saying in their own languages that something is approaching, something is changing, something that has been sleeping for thousands of years is beginning to stir, and the world that seemed so solid, so completely known and mapped and understood, is revealing itself to be stranger than we imagined, more connected to forces we do not control, more subject to cycles that operate on timescales that dwarf human history. The sky is fully light now, the stars invisible in the blue, but you know they are still there, still moving on their ancient paths, and somewhere among them, too faint to see but growing brighter with each passing day, the wanderer continues its approach, carrying with it the weight of prophecy and the promise of return. And the signs continue to multiply, subtle but unmistakable for those who know how to read them, saying, "Prepare, prepare. The gate is opening, the boundary is thinning, and soon what was divided will reconnect, what was hidden will reveal itself, and humanity will face the moment the ancient teachers warned about, the moment when we must show what we have become during the long silence, and discover whether we are ready for what comes next." Chapter 7. The name Atlas. You are standing now before an ancient temple wall, somewhere in a place that time has nearly forgotten, where the desert has reclaimed what humans once built, and the wind carries sand across stones that were carved when the world was young. The wall before you shows a figure that appears in countless variations across different cultures and ages, a being standing with arms raised, supporting an arch or dome or sphere above their head, bearing the weight of something vast, and beneath this figure are symbols you recognize from Sumerian tablets, marks that indicate this is not just any bearer of burdens, but specifically the one connected to the wanderer, to the red light that moves through the heavens, announcing change. The Greeks would later call this figure Atlas, the titan who held up the sky, but the image predates Greek civilization by thousands of years, appearing in Mesopotamian art, in Egyptian temple carvings, in structures so old that we have no records of who built them or when, and the consistency of the image across such vast spans of time and distance suggests not that different cultures independently invented the same symbol, but that they were all preserving memory of something real, something or someone that actually existed, and whose role was so important that knowledge of it had to be passed down through every possible medium, through stone and clay and story, through ritual and art, and the careful instruction of priests who understood they were guardians, not just of temples, but of information that must survive until the cycle turned again. The name Atlas, when traced back through its linguistic roots, carries meanings that modern usage has obscured. It connects to words meaning to bear, to endure, to carry across distance, and in its oldest forms, it links to concepts of suffering and patience, of bearing weight, not just physical, but temporal, carrying something across time as well as space. The Sumerians had their own version of this name, a word that appears in texts describing the red wanderer, and when linguists analyze the Sumerian term, they find it shares the same essential meaning: one who carries, one who endures, one who maintains connection across separation. And this meaning transforms how we understand the role of the wanderer in the ancient prophecy. It was not simply an object moving through space, but a carrier, something that maintained connection between the realm of the Anunnaki and the realm of humanity during the long period of separation, something that bore the weight of the relationship across thousands of years when direct contact was impossible. And its return marks not just the approach of the old teachers, but the moment when what it has been carrying, the message, the knowledge, the connection itself, can finally be delivered to those for whom it was intended. You place your hand on the wall, feeling the warmth of stone that has absorbed thousands of days of sunlight, and you trace the outline of the figure with your fingers, following the curve of arms raised in perpetual effort, and you begin to understand that the ancients were not creating religious art, but leaving a map, a guide, a way of telling future generations that when you see the wanderer return, when you see the light moving through the sky following the path we have marked and measured and preserved, know that it carries something precious, something you will need, and its arrival means the time has come to receive what has been held in trust across the ages. Modern astronomers who named the object 3I Atlas followed a convention. The first part of the name indicating its origin as an interstellar visitor, the second part referring to the survey that first detected it. But names have a way of resonating beyond their intended meaning, and the choice of Atlas, whether conscious or intuitive, connects the object to thousands of years of symbolism about bearing weight, about holding up the heavens, about serving as the link between earth and sky. Some researchers have noted the oddness of the name, pointing out that other interstellar objects received more prosaic designations, simple catalog numbers without mythological associations, and they wonder if the person who chose to name this particular visitor after the ancient sky-bearer was influenced by something they saw in the data, some quality of the object that suggested it was carrying something, holding something, bearing weight across the darkness of space. The question becomes whether the name is coincidence, whether modern science accidentally chose a designation that perfectly matches ancient prophecy, or whether the connection runs deeper, whether the same intuition that led ancient priests to call the wanderer by a name meaning bearer has somehow persisted in human consciousness, surfacing again when we encounter the same phenomenon in our modern age, giving us the right name without fully understanding why it feels right, why it fits, why it seems to capture something essential about what this object represents. You walk along the temple wall, following the carvings as they tell a story in images that predate written language, and you see the sky-bearer depicted not once, but many times, each image showing a different moment in a sequence. And as you follow the sequence, you begin to understand that the ancients were describing not a static role, but a journey. The figure starts in one position, standing firmly with arms raised. Then gradually the posture changes. The arms begin to lower, the weight shifts, and in the final images, the figure is no longer holding the sky up, but guiding it down, bringing what was above into contact with what is below. And you realize this is the moment of return, the completion of the cycle, when the bearer finishes the long task of maintaining separation and begins the new task of facilitating reunion, bringing together what was divided, reconnecting what was held apart. And this is why the wanderer's name is so important. It tells us not just what the object is, but what it does, what role it plays in the larger pattern. It is the Atlas, the bearer, the one who carries the weight of the sky across time, until the moment arrives when earth and sky can meet again. But here is what makes your breath catch as you study these ancient images. Here is what transforms the name from interesting symbolism into something more immediate and urgent. The final carving in the sequence shows the sky-bearer surrounded by other figures, smaller, clearly human, and these human figures have their arms raised in the same gesture as the bearer, as if they are learning to hold the weight themselves, as if the moment of return is also a moment of transfer, when responsibility passes from the old holders to the new, from the ancient teachers to humanity. And this image suggests that the return is not about the Anunnaki coming back to resume control, but about them returning to complete the teaching, to show humanity how to bear the weight they have been bearing, how to hold up the sky, how to take on the role of guardians and maintainers, how to become, in our own right, what they have been for us. And if this interpretation is correct, then the name, Atlas, describes not just the wanderer, but what we are meant to become, bearers of weight, holders of responsibility, beings who can carry the connection between earth and sky, between the physical and the divine, between the past and the future, and maintain that connection through our own effort, our own understanding, our own transformation from those who receive to those who give, from students to teachers, from children to parents of what comes after. Some ancient texts that mention the sky-bearer include a detail that most translators have struggled to understand. They say that the bearer is not tired by the weight, that holding up the sky does not exhaust, but strengthens, that the longer the weight is carried, the easier it becomes. And this seems to contradict our understanding of how burden works, how carrying heavy things wears us down, makes us weaker. But perhaps the ancients were describing something different than physical weight. Perhaps they were talking about the weight of knowledge, of responsibility, of awareness. And these kinds of weight do indeed work differently. The more you carry them, the stronger you become. The longer you hold them, the more natural they feel, until what seemed impossible at first becomes simply what you do, who you are. And if the wanderer has been carrying the weight of connection across thousands of years, if it has been holding the relationship between humanity and the Anunnaki across all the time of separation, then perhaps it is not burdened but fulfilled by this role. Perhaps this is what it was made for, shaped for, intended for. And its return is not relief from burden, but completion of purpose. The moment when what it has carried so long can finally be delivered, and the weight can be shared with those who are now strong enough to help bear it. You step back from the temple wall and look at the full sequence of carvings, seeing them now not as separate images, but as a single story, a narrative that begins with separation and ends with reunion, but includes between those points the long middle period of bearing, of enduring, of maintaining connection across distance and time. And you understand that this middle period is where we have been living. This is the age between the departure of the teachers and their return, the age when the wanderer has been doing its work in the darkness beyond our sight. And now, that work is approaching completion. The bearer is coming back, bringing what it has held in trust. And humanity stands at the moment depicted in those final carvings, the moment when we must decide if we are ready to raise our own arms, to accept the weight being offered, to become, in our turn, the bearers, the holders, the ones who maintain connection not just for ourselves, but for those who will come after us, for the ages and cycles that will follow, when we are as ancient as the Sumerians are to us, and beings we cannot imagine will look back at this moment and ask whether we had the courage to accept what was offered, whether we were wise enough to understand what the return of the wanderer truly meant. The name Atlas echoes now through your understanding with new resonance. It is not just a label, but a prophecy. Not just a designation, but a calling. It names what the wanderer is, and what we are meant to become. And as 3-Eye Atlas continues its journey across our sky, brightening each night, approaching the point where it will be visible to naked eyes, where anyone who looks up will see the light that announces change, the name itself becomes a question asked of everyone who hears it. Are you ready to be Atlas? Are you ready to bear weight? Are you ready to hold connection? Are you ready to become the bridge between earth and sky, between past and future, between the human and the divine? And if you are not ready now, if the weight seems too great, if the responsibility feels overwhelming, remember that the ancients said bearing weight makes you stronger, that holding up the sky does not exhaust, but transforms, that what seems impossible becomes natural when you understand it is not burden, but purpose, not obligation, but gift, not weight that crushes, but weight that lifts. And the wanderer comes not to demand, but to offer, not to test, but to invite. And the name it carries is the name we will answer to, if we choose to accept what it brings, if we choose to raise our arms and discover that we are stronger than we knew, more capable than we imagined, and ready for the role that has been waiting for us since the teachers first departed and left behind the promise that they would return when we had grown enough to meet them, not as students, but as partners, not as children, but as fellow bearers of the weight that holds the sky. If you have followed this journey through ancient prophecy and modern signs, through the conflict of gods and the return of wanderers, leave a like and a comment sharing your thoughts. Because this story is not just about the past or the future, but about now, about the choices we make in this moment when the cycle is turning, and your engagement helps this message reach others who are also watching the sky, also feeling the change, also sensing that something vast is approaching and wondering what it means for the world we thought we knew. The path has brought us from the first sighting of the Red Wanderer to the deep meaning hidden in its name. And now we approach the final question, the one that all the other questions have been leading toward, the moment described in every prophecy, the crossing, the meeting of the two fire stars, the time when Earth stands between the Wanderer and the world that follows it. And in that moment of perfect alignment, humanity will face what the ancient teachers called the weighing. Not judgment, but assessment. Not condemnation, but recognition. And we will discover whether the weight we have learned to bear has made us strong enough for what comes next, whether the sky we have been holding up was preparation for holding something even greater, and whether the name Atlas, which we gave to a visitor from the stars, is also the name that will be given to us when the old teachers return and see that their students have become teachers in their own right, ready to bear the weight of ages, ready to hold connection across the vast distances of space and time, ready to take our place among those who maintain the fabric of existence itself, who hold up the sky not just for one world, but for all worlds, not just for one cycle, but for all the cycles that spiral forward into a future we are only beginning to imagine. You are standing now between two lights, though you cannot see them both with your eyes. One burns visibly in the night sky, growing brighter each evening as Three-Eye Atlas completes its long approach, and the other moves in darkness beyond the edge of vision. Nibiru, if the ancients were correct, following its vast orbit toward the moment of closest passage. And between these two fires, between the wanderer that announces and the world that follows, Earth hangs in perfect balance, waiting, holding its breath, preparing for the crossing that was written in clay 5,000 years ago and is now unfolding in the sky above us. The Sumerians said this moment would feel different, that time itself would seem to slow, that the air would carry a weight that had nothing to do with atmospheric pressure. And standing here beneath the stars, you feel exactly what they described. A thickness in the moment, a sense that reality is holding still, pausing between what was and what will be. And in this pause, this breath between ages, humanity faces the question that all the prophecy has been leading toward. Not, what will the Anunnaki do when they return? But what have we become while they were gone? Not whether we will be judged worthy, but whether we have learned to judge ourselves, to measure our own growth, to recognize in our own reflection either the wisdom Enki hoped for or the recklessness Enlil feared, and to accept responsibility for whichever truth we find there. The prophecy was never about the end of the world. It was about the end of childhood, the moment when humanity must step forward from the shelter of ancient teaching and demonstrate that we can walk alone, that we can bear the weight of our own choices, that we can hold up our own sky. And the return of the teachers is not rescue, but verification, not intervention, but witness. They come back not to save us from ourselves, but to see if we have learned to save ourselves, to create rather than destroy, to build rather than break, to choose wisdom even when power makes other choices possible. And as the two fire stars draw closer in their ancient dance, as the alignment prophesied in Enki's tablet approaches its completion, the question becomes immediate and personal for every human being who looks up at the night sky and wonders what that growing light means, whether it carries threat or promise, whether the return will bring the partnership Enki envisioned or the correction Enlil warned about. And the answer depends not on what the Anunnaki decide, but on what we have already decided through the millions of small choices that make up the fabric of civilization. Through every act of kindness or cruelty, through every moment of creation or destruction. through every time we chose to grow in wisdom or to grow only in power. And those choices have already been made, are being made right now, will be made in every moment between now and the crossing. And together, they write the answer that will be read when the old teachers return and look upon what their students have become. Perhaps the hidden city the Sumerians spoke of is not a place at all, but a state of being. Not a location buried under sand, but a level of consciousness that becomes accessible when humanity reaches the right threshold. When enough individuals choose growth over comfort. When enough hearts open to possibility rather than closing in fear. And perhaps the crossing is not an astronomical event, but a moment of collective awakening. When the boundaries we have built between self and other, between human and divine, between earth and sky, grow thin enough that we can finally see what was always there, always true, always waiting for us to become ready to perceive it. And if this is correct, then the return is happening now, has been happening since the Wanderer first appeared, will continue happening as more people look up, more consciousness shifts, more understanding dawns that we are not separate from the cosmos, but part of it, not observers of the divine, but expressions of it. Not waiting for gods to return, but discovering that what we called gods were simply versions of ourselves that understood what we are only beginning to remember. That consciousness is not limited to biology. That intelligence flows through the universe like light through space, and that the Anunnaki were not aliens in the sense of other, but aliens in the sense of older, further along the path we are all walking, the path from unconscious matter to conscious spirit, from beings who are shaped by the universe to beings who shape the universe, from creatures of earth to bearers of sky, from students to teachers, from children to parents of new worlds, new possibilities, new expressions of what existence can become when it looks at itself and chooses to grow. The sky is lightening now, dawn approaching to wash away the stars, but not to wash away what they have shown you. What this journey through ancient prophecy and modern mystery has revealed. That we stand at a threshold the Sumerians predicted, that the signs they said would appear are appearing, that the cycle they measured is completing its turn, and that the choice they said humanity would face is here now, present in every moment, asking not what you believe about ancient gods or distant worlds, but how you will live today, what you will create, what weight you will bear, what sky you will hold up through your own effort and understanding and commitment to becoming what you were always meant to be. If you have stayed with me through this long night of story and silence, through the watching and the wondering, then you know that the prophecy is not about them, but about us. Not about what returns from the sky, but about what rises from the earth to meet it. And as 3-eye Atlas grows brighter in the heavens, as whatever follows it continues its long approach, we have time still to make the choice that determines what the crossing brings. Time to become Atlas ourselves, bearers of weight and holders of connection. Time to look at what we have built and ask if it reflects wisdom or only power, if it serves growth or only comfort, if it opens doors or only closes them. And time to change course if we find we have been walking the wrong path, because the teachers did not leave us helpless. They left us everything we need, knowledge and tools, and, most importantly, the example of what consciousness can become when it chooses to evolve, when it accepts the responsibility that comes with awareness, when it raises its arms not in surrender, but in embrace of the weight that makes us strong, the burden that sets us free, the sky that we hold up together, and in holding, discover we are vast enough to contain it, and the crossing is not catastrophe, but birth, not ending, but beginning, and the old gods return to find we have become gods ourselves, young and stumbling perhaps, but gods nonetheless, bearing our sky, creating our world, choosing our future, and ready at last to step into the partnership that was always meant to be. when the silence finally breaks and the gate between worlds stands open, and what was divided remembers it was always one, and the journey continues beyond anything the ancient prophets could imagine, beyond what even these words can contain, into the vast possibility that waits on the other side of fear, on the far shore of the crossing, where the two fires meet and something new is born from their union, something that includes both earth and sky, both human and divine, both the students we were and the teachers we are becoming. And the story that began 5,000 years ago with priests watching a red light move across the darkness finds its completion not in answers, but in questions, not in knowing, but in becoming, not in the return of the gods, but in the recognition that we are, and always have been, what we were waiting for. The ones who hold the sky, the ones who bear the weight, the ones who cross the threshold and discover that home was never behind us, but always ahead, always calling, always waiting for us to become brave enough, strong enough, wise enough to claim it.